All right. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to First Metro Securities event with the Ateneo Center for Economic Research and Development, or ACERD. My name is Cal Garcia from First Metro Securities Research, and I'll be hosting today's session with ACERD. ACERD is an academic think tank from the Ateneo de Manila University focused on advancing policy recommendations that promote industry competition and economic growth. This afternoon, Dr. Luis Dumlao will provide us with a rundown of the Philippines 2Q24 GDP results and economic performance. He will also share ACERD's outlook and insights for the Philippines as we go through the next half of 2024. As a brief background, Dr. Luis Dumlao is a senior fellow of the Ateneo Eagle Watch. He was the former dean of the John Gokongwei School of Management at the Ateneo de Manila University. His areas of expertise include macroeconomics and international financial economics. But before we proceed with today's session, let me run through some housekeeping matters for this event. As all attendees will be muted during the presentation, you are more than welcome and encouraged to type in your questions in the Q&A box. We will proceed with the Q&A after the presentation from our speaker. Finally, we would like to remind everyone that the views and opinions expressed during this webinar are those of ACERDS and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of First Metro Securities and the Metro Bank Group. All right, so without further ado, I will now pass on the floor to Dr. Luis Dumlao for his presentation. You may take the floor, Dr. Dumlao.
Hello, good afternoon. Thanks for having me once again. To save some bandwidth, let me shut down my video and I'll share now my presentation. So we now have the Philippine Economic Insight second quarter 2024, thanks to our partners with First Metro Securities. I'll have the presentation, standard format, which I copied from a colleague of mine in Ateneo, Dr. Shell Hapito. He calls it the PITIC test. The P stands for pressure or inflation. The D stands for trabajo or employment. And the K stands for kita or GDP. I'll now go to finance, in particular, international finance, and then public and private finance. Private is going to be very brief because our partners in First Metro Securities are more expert in that field. And then I'll go with the wrap up. So we go now without going straight to pressure or inflation. The latest inflation was June. It was 4.4%, an acceleration from the previous 3.8%. Let's look at it, how bad it is from historical perspective, and what are the causes, and where on regional basis, and then we looking forward. So historically speaking, from 1971 to 2022, so that's 50 years of data, shocks are usually externally driven and supply side. We have the case of the first oil crisis, and then the second oil crisis, and then we have the third, the debt crisis. I had it in blue as opposed to red because it is not supply side, it is self-inflicting. And then, of course, you have the global recession in 1991, and then the Asian financial crisis and the worst El Nino that I can remember. And then you have the Iraq War and the increase of the value or the introduction of the value-added tax in the Philippines. And then that's the global financial crisis that started in the United States. And then the shortage of rice, and then the war in Ukraine. For every administration, the average inflation has decreased except for President Duterte and President Marcos so far. So, for example, you have the average inflation of 16% during President Marcos Sr.'s time, 12% during President Corazon Aquino's time, about 8% in President Ramos's time, 4.4% in President Gloria Arroyo's time, and 2.7% during President Benigno Aquino's time, and then slightly ever increasing from 3.2 to 3.9% during the Duterte administration, and then now so far the trend has been going up. In terms of the source, the main source of inflation, so there's a slight a deceleration in inflation from July and then to June of last month, and then it increased every time to 4.4, missing the target, the central bank target range of between 2 to 4%. And the main source of that, as we will see, is food and alcoholic beverages, specifically rice. And then we have a minor downward pressure. Quite often the source of inflation had been due to the price of oil globally, but there is now a downward pressure in terms of that, with the price of oil decreasing from $87 per barrel to $75 per barrel year on year. Here are the sources of inflation, basically. The biggest contributor to inflation is rice, with an inflation of around 21%. And then there's actually the negative of inflation in fish and electricity. Of course, they're not all weighted equally. So in terms of weight, the point target is 3%. If we have the price, that's 1.6, 1.7, that's some rounding errors here. So if you have that, and then the next three, which are food and meat, all of them, so rice would contribute 1.7, and the next two, food and meat, would contribute 0.3. Just for the three of them, inflation is already 5%. But then again, the next four, in a sense, are negative contributors of inflation, particularly information, sugar, electricity, and fish. And that has a negative 6 pressure in inflation. So 5 minus 6 is 4.4%. And that pretty much explains why the inflation is 4.4%. There are about 59 items in the bag of consumer goods in the in the Consumer Price Index. So we have what we have here is we have 9 products. So the 50 remaining pretty much balance them out to about 3%. And so where is inflation heading? So inflation is 4.4% this last July, and we predicted to be 4.2%, and then slowly going down to within range. And basically, the main source, once again, is still rice, with over 20% inflation. But the base effect of rice starts in September. And the base effect of the rest will dwindle down. And of course, if you look at, of course, quite often the source of inflation had been oil. But for example, here, what we estimate is a 100% increase in the price of oil will have a 1.5% pressure for inflation to go up. But then again, that's not really too much of a pressure, precisely because year on year, August 11, 23 to August 6, 24, inflation actually has gone down from $87 per barrel to $75 per barrel. Another source why inflation we expect to start decelerating because of the base effect in the rice. So for example, this July on July. So this is the consumer price index for rice. That's at 21%. So if it started very low and it goes up, you can easily get a very high inflation on rice. But September, you will see here, it starts high, and the increase is going to be just 6%. And that's why we expect the main source of inflation, which is rice, the its effect will dwindle down in terms of pressuring inflation. I go now to the T of PITIC, which is trabajo or employment. Uh, uh, Employment has been its record low since 2001. I think since 2004. They say here it's record low, but the record low, basically they had a different definition of how they calculated unemployment. But right now, since they changed the calculation of unemployment, it is record low in that sense. So what do official rates mean in headcounts? So to get some sort of a better feel, we estimate a population of 160,471,000. Out of the 116,047,471,000, 37,832 are younger than 15 years old and therefore cannot be part of the labor force. So that leaves us with 78,639,000. Out of this, non-participants are 26,740,000. One could be a college student, so a full-time college student does not work, 18, 19, 20 years old, they're not participants. Or one could be just retired. For example, someone that's 75 years old could be retired and not participating in the labor market anymore. And that leaves us with the labor force participation rate, 66%. That's where government 66% is coming from. That's 51,898,000. Out of the approximately 51,898,000, 3.1% is unemployed. This is what their government data is saying, 3.1%. And that calculates to 1,620,000. And the rest are employed. That's 50,279,000. And that's where the 96.9% government data is coming from. Among all those that's employed, approximately 50 million of them, 12.1%, that's this data, or 6,083,000 are underemployed. One could be employed but works part-time, so does not make enough money, or one could be employed but still need more income because so for example, typical classroom example would be vendors selling in the streets. So that leaves us with 44,196,000. And then from the non-participants, we also have the OFW, the Overseas Filipino Workers. That's 1,963,000 as of last data, compared to the 2,160,000 when it peaked pre-pandemic. That means basically what it's saying is we add the 44 million and the 2 million OFW, the typical Filipino family of five, you have a family of five, typically two of them are working, fully employed. In terms of employment rates, so we'd see unemployment rate decrease by 1.4% from 4.5 to 3.1%, and underemployment increased by 0.1 from 12% to 12.1%. In headcounts, effectively, the market employed 1,437,000, absorbing 730,000 new labor force participants, could be college graduates, and then employing 707,000 previously unemployed. But effectively, we have an additional 208,000 underemployed, an increase of 3.5%. In terms of job creations, in terms of the sector, the service and industry sector produced 2,432,000, jobs, and it more than offset the job loss in agriculture, which is 997,000. In terms of share, the biggest employers are wholesale and trade, agriculture, and construction, and that compose 52% of all employment. Between the three, the biggest employers produce 549,000 new jobs. By job creation, the biggest job winners are construction, wholesale, and accommodation. And that is basically, they have created 1,862,000 jobs. Among the biggest losers, which are agriculture, public administration, and fishing and aquaculture, 1,337,000 jobs were lost. In terms of occupational employment, the skilled, so the biggest job loss is in the in skilled agricultural forestry, 388,000 jobs lost, and the biggest winner is services and sales workers. To the extent that service and sales workers typically make more income than skilled agricultural, forestry, and fishery workers, that's more of a half full rather than a half empty prognosis. In terms of class worker, an unpaid family worker, the biggest loss. So it's sort of bad because it's a loss, but then again, the loss is on the lowest class per se, for lack of a better term. And the biggest job gain is on work for private establishment, making or creating 2,591,000 jobs. So to the extent that working in private establishment is more skilled, makes more money, then that is an improvement in the class, in the kind of jobs in terms of class. Now, the newest data is Kita. The GDP grew by 6.3%, better than what most economists expected. So how is it in terms of the last 20 years? So for example, these have been the growth the last 20 years. You have the usual trends, presidential election of Gloria Arroyo, the presidential election, and then the global financial crisis. And then here you have the presidential election of President Benigno Aquino. And then the government tightening up, suspecting government projects as corrupt, actually hurt the economy. And then you have the presidential election of President Duterte, and the presidential, and then of course the COVID-19 lockdown, and the presidential election of President Marcos Jr. So that the actual now is 6.3%. So now we have what I have here is the ones in dot is what would have been the growth of the economy if nothing changes. We just show up and do the same routine, and the economy basically grew faster than its potential. These are the average growths per president. So it's now president. This is now the average is 6.2%, which is the same as the average of President Aquino. So we have this is the sort of like, so it's tied in terms of who has the better performance in terms of GDP growth. This is the business cycle. What I have here is in red is what we had predicted, what we anticipate. This is the growth. The red in growth is what would happen if we just showed up to work, not doing anything differently, and this is the natural path of the economy. So, for example, we expected it to be 5.9%, but it actually was 6.3%. So it's better than expected. And the reason for that is if we go to construction, construction is anticipated to be 7.5%, and it actually grew. It spiked to 16%, so more than double the expected. And the transport expected to grow at 5.7% and then spiked at 14.8%. In the third quarter, in the fourth quarter, it will go back to this. The steady state is the sort of the natural growth, the equilibrium growth of the economy. So the third quarter will slightly overshoot the steady state, and then it will settle back, or the statistical term is revert back to the equilibrium. But year round, it's going to be 6.3% for 2024. So that for the annual growth, it will slightly miss the steady state. So still a very, it's a negative output gap, but very, very small at the minimum. And that is going to be led by construction, 13.4%, and transport growing at 11.7%. Then accommodation at 11.2%. The last column is the number of years an economy would double. So for example, the fastest one that will double is accommodation. So if you're in the service industry, your business should double in 6 years. If not, then that's a benchmark that you are falling behind the rest of the market. The second fastest, of course, is transport, doubling every 7 years, and then construction doubling every 8 years. The slowest one is, unfortunately, agriculture, 95 years. This is the expenditure side. So performed better than expected, 5.9, turns out to be 6.3 in the second quarter. And then if on the expenditure side, more than 5 times, this is probably not sustainable. So the government was expected to increase its spending, but 1.2%, it turned out to be, it increased by 10.7%. We also missed construction. Construction was expected at 16, expenditure in construction was expected to be 6.1%. It turned out to be 16.1%. World economies opening up, and what you see here, net primary income from abroad, dollars that come in as opposed to dollars that go out because of the trade deficit. Basically, the net primary income, dollars that come in is expected to more than offset dollars that will go out, putting a positive pressure, making the peso predictably more stable. Consumption would still be on the negative gap. So it's the steady state is 5.9%, but it's going to be just 4.7%. But the good thing is that it's going to be an investment-led growth with the year the 10.4 exceeding the 10.1. Although for the year, it's still going to be 8.3, still going to be less than the 10.5%. And then the net primary income is expected to more than offset the export. So in other words, the dollar that comes in is expected to more than offset the dollar that goes out. The outlook is, in terms of comparing it with Asian economies, is that the Philippines is going to be the second fastest growing economy in Asia, only behind India. Going to finance, this is the exchange rate. Exchange rate now is 57 pesos and 27 cents per dollar, and you have the, with respect to these respective currencies, the Japanese yen, the British pound sterling, and the euro. And the theory says basically is what we would say is we are 95% confidence within the year, it will fall between 55 pesos and 13 cents and 59 pesos and 41 cents per dollar. So the peso is probably will move upward. Although this month there has been an acceleration of the peso, but not really acceleration of the peso per se, because what's happened is basically, so this is what happened the past month. So it started high. This is the Philippine peso relative to the dollar, and it actually went down. So the peso appreciated in relation to the dollar. So this is the case where, but this is the mostly traded currency in ASEAN, the Singaporean dollar. The Singaporean dollar also accelerated, so it went down. The mostly traded currency in Asia is the Japanese yen. Even with the Japanese yen went down, so it's Japanese yen per dollar. So the yen also accelerated. And this is the second mostly traded currency in the world. Of course, the first mostly traded currency is the US dollar. So this thing decreasing from this to that. Which indicates it's the peso did not really get stronger. It's really the fact that all these things are happening. It is actually the dollar that's weakening, and my suspicion is that the market is anticipating the Fed to ease its policy rates. The gross international reserve, this is the import cover. So we have the historical. The import cover is the equivalent number of months of our of the gross international reserve. So, for example, in global financial crises, the reserve went down. It became equivalent to 5.9 months of import during the height of the build, the importing of equipment during the Duterte administration. It went down to 6.6 months. And then it peaked during the shutdown. The gross international reserves was at record $110 billion, and that was equivalent to 12.6 months of import cover. But right now, the gross international reserve now is $105 billion, and is equivalent to 7.8 months. As a benchmark, a healthy, rather healthy import cover is something that is more than 6 months of reserve. This is now the public finance and budget. This is the budget deficit. So from a historical perspective, we've only had positive. We had only had budget surpluses in 4 years during President Ramos. Everything else is negative, but that's okay because as long as a healthy deficit should be less than 3%. So obviously we were below 3% during President Benigno Aquino's time, but then because of the pandemic, it became a deficit equivalent to 8.6%, and now we're trying to put it down to go back once again to less than 3% of the GDP. The Philippine steady state is somewhere here, which means for as long as the deficit is less than this amount, this line here, about 6.1%, that means the economy would be outgrowing the debt. So this is now the thing about outgrowing the debt, public finance once again. You'd see here as the debt grew to 8.2 trillion, doubling from 4 trillion to 8.2 trillion from 2003 to 2019. The debt to GDP ratio actually halved from 87% to 42%, which means basically historically the strategy had been not to eliminate the debt, but rather to outgrow the debt. Of course, all of that reversed during the pandemic time. And it's now back to 61%. And in perspective, basically to be in the watch list, uh, to be in the watch list, IMF watch list, uh, the threshold is 60%, and we are now at 61%. It ticked up compared to last month. But this is below the Reinhardt-Rugoff threshold of 90%. That threshold means that if your debt to GDP ratio reaches over 90%, that will start hurting the GDP growth. So from 2022 to 2024, the debt to GDP ratio slightly declined, but it went up a bit. And see, the debt to GDP ratio here is so 2008, and it went down to 2019. So that's about 10 years. So that means if we do the same strategy, it would take 10 years for us to get back to the pre-pandemic level. Of course, the debt is composed of external debt and domestic debt. This is now external debt, same story as the external debt increased to 2.8 trillion pesos. The debt to GDP, the external debt to GDP ratio had declined from 50 to 15% pre-pandemic, but now it's back to 19%, but still a rather a safe number. The real debt is actually domestic debt. So the story, once again, it's as the debt increased from 2 trillion to 5.3 trillion, the debt to GDP ratio declined from 38% to 28%, but all of that reversed during the pandemic. And now it even increases slightly. It's so far. So this is the one that we have to watch over. I go to private finance by my colleagues in First Metro are experts in this, so I'll be very brief. So in terms of performance of exchange rates, the Philippines is you could say in the middle of the pack compared to Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, and Thailand. I raised this up because this is a common question. So there's been a concern that the credit card receivables has been in record high, which is now 744 billion pesos. But then if we put this in perspective, that amount is still less than 0.5% of the GDP, and so and then the non-performing receivables is actually more than half, from 8.9% in the height of pandemic to 4.1%. So, but that is the formal sector. The caveat, the informal sector is probably another story. So as a wrap up, the average inflation of 3.8% will be within central bank target range of 2 to 4%. Unemployment is on the boom, and it has to do with construction. Based on annual growth of income of 6.3%, will meet government's growth assumption of 6.7%. In a previous briefing, we said it will barely hit at 6%. So there is now an upgrade from 6% to 6.3%. And the peso will move sideways. It is a question not really so much of the peso, but the strength or the weakness of the dollar. Then the nuance of the public finance, the risk is not internal, the risk is probably external, with other countries having problems in their public finance. I end this presentation, and so I'll wait and be happy to take your question and answers. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Dumlao, for that insightful and informative presentation. Now we will open the floor for Q&A. So to our audience, you may continue typing in your questions in the chat or in the Q&A box below, as we give Dr. Dumlao a few minutes to catch his breath before he addresses your questions. Okay, while waiting, kindly settle in before we answer some questions. Uh, okay, we have some questions on the table right now. Okay, all right. So, Dr. Dumla, are you ready for the first question?
Yeah.
So, one of our audience said that they are trying to imagine the service sector slash accommodations doubling in 6 years. Mathematically, what does the government need to do to achieve that growth in 6 years? Is it logically possible?
Well, by itself, I think the question is what should government do for accommodation to double in 6 years? In fact, government does not have to do anything. It's just have to accommodate the infrastructure. Uh, the government should just be a facilitator, not the government being part of the business. But by doing that, the that subsector, which is the the restaurant accommodation, that will double in 6 years.
Got it. Thanks for that, Dr. Dumlao. Another question we have is, what were the biggest drivers of inflation going up from June to July?
It's all rise, consistently growing by 20% every year, contribution of about 1.5%. So instead of the target 3% inflation, uh, by rice only, it becomes 4%, 4.5%. So that, and others, of course, offset, trying like electricity and fish. Sometimes they have deflation as opposed to inflation.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Dumlao. For our next question, it's quite timely. So, what are your expectations on the BSP's policy decision this week? When do you think will the BSP start cutting rates?
Uh, that's a tough question because it's a guessing. It's me guessing what they're thinking. I think I can guess. I can guess economic numbers more than I can guess what people think. So, but based on what Governor Eddie Remolona has said, uh, he has he has toned down on his hawkishness the past few weeks and has turned a bit uh, 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 dovish. So there is between so that it's probably a 50-50% as opposed to before it's 100% no policy no interest rate decrease.
Got it. So, for this week, no interest rate. That's your outlook, right? All
Probably
right.
50-50, I would say.
Got it. How about for one audience from our question, do we have GDPs of the other ASEAN countries, while PH may be the fastest growing? It may also make sense to understand the total GDP of each.
Okay, it's the if we look at the more not just the GDP, but the per capita GDP, the one that we should probably look. So the highest per capita GDP is, or average income, is Singapore, followed by Malaysia, followed by Thailand, uh, then Indonesia, Philippines, and Thailand. They're round about the same. Okay. So yes, we are the fastest. Our GDP is the fastest growing, but in terms of average income, we are still below, definitely.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Dumlao. One of our audience is curious, wouldn't a budget surplus support the sustainability of the GDP growth? Is it something in the pipeline of the government plans, or are we okay with maintaining a manageable budget deficit?
Uh, the thing about having a surplus, it sounds good. It's a surplus, but it's the same. It's the same. There's another term for that, and that term is austerity, and that means contractionary fiscal policy that means government spending less, and that means less construction, less jobs. And that's why we don't prescribe that. What we do is we still have a deficit, a healthy deficit of 3%, hopefully, but it's not yet there. It's still the deficit is equivalent to 5.9% of GDP. The goal is for us to reach less than 3%. That's healthy. And this is a case as even if we have a deficit of 3%, the fact that we're growing by 6%, that means we would be able to outgrow our debt. So it's not a question of eliminating the debt, but rather it's a question of outgrowing the debt. As a business school, former dean of business school, I'd always say, well, I was a dean of the John Go Kong Wei School of Management. If Sir John Go Kong Wei had balanced his budget his school life, there would not have been JG Summit. What he'd done is he borrowed, he invested, except what happened is his asset grew and grew and grew faster than his debt. So that's it's basically a similar strategy that personally for me I prefer.
Got it. So sometimes that is good. Okay. Again, for questions, feel free to type in your questions in the Q&A box below. All right. For our next question, which sector do you think will be good to invest in considering the current economic conditions?
I'll yield my answer to that with my colleagues with First Metrosec. I think they do give briefings on which sectors best, specifically which firms, which corporations, or which listed firms, or which bonds to invest. But then, if it's just generally speaking, it's the sources of growth are right now construction, retail, and then restaurants. And that's basically it.
Got it. Thanks, Dr. Dumlao. So for our audience, maybe you can catch us in one of our next webinars below for some recommendations. So for the next question, do you have estimates on how large the POGO impact on GDP or employment is?
Right now, they're all there are no formal data. It's all informal observations, basically. But what we're seeing so far, what they're saying is that POGOs generally do not employ Filipinos. And as expected, it has not had an impact on employment. In fact, unemployment is at record low. And as we see right now, GDP is growing, one of the fastest second fastest in Asia for the next 2 years. And it seems that POGO is not so much of a factor economically. But from what I hear, it has a big negative social effect.
Got it. Thanks again, Dr. Dumlao, and thank you to our audience. Keep those questions coming. So for our next question, in terms of the internal debt load, usually which entities hold the debt?
It's us. It's your savings account, the banks invest debt. So banks, financial institutions, basically investing in treasury bills, in treasury in T-bills and T-bonds, and basically where does that come from? It's from us, the retail investors.
Got it. First, the next question is, also, will the current situation of the livestock market be any way foreseeing any export or possibilities in the next 10 years?
Sorry,
Particularly,
I missed that. Yeah, sorry.
yeah. So, will the current situation of the livestock market be any way foreseeing of any export possibilities in the next 10 years? Particularly on the competitiveness of livestock prices for the export market affected by various factors in the Philippine economy.
Uh, I'm not particularly an expert on that field livestock, but from what I know, we tend to be net importers of livestock products, and from what I know, it is not our competitive advantage. Many in agriculture is not our competitive advantage. For example, we get 20 typhoons a year. Uh, and then countries like Thailand and Vietnam, they especially Thailand get well, 4 typhoons per year, and it's not even as strong as ours, and it's much weaker than ours. So that is something that we it's not a question of us increasing the quantity of output, but rather raising the level of output.
Got it.
I'll give an example. Instead of producing indigenous products, we should be producing organic products, or we should not stop at harvest. They talk about agriculture. We should not stop. We should not stop focusing on increasing the output of harvest, but rather we should focus on post-harvest manufacturing. For example, if you just harvest the fish that is in the fishing agricultural industry. But as soon as you debone it, it becomes part of manufacturing, and you put value added into it, and you create jobs to the same people.
Got it, Dr. Lo. I think that's where the support local tag came from. So we have time for a few more questions. So for the next one, what do you believe are the main drivers of the significant increase in construction business income? Is this mainly government infrastructure related?
It's a combination of government and private, and even retail. You know, as soon as you fix everyone here, as soon as you fix your house, that's already part of construction. So it could be anything. It could be the big ones, the big malls, the condominiums. It could be the government infrastructures, and there are also lots of part of the private infrastructures that it's part of, is also the public private partnerships that also plays a big role in it.
Right. Thanks, Dr. Dumlao. Again, for our participants who would like to ask questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A box below. We will be wrapping up. There are no more questions shortly. But yeah, keep them coming, guys. All right, for the next question, is there a possibility for inflation to reach above 5% this year?
Uh, that's always possible, but it is not. But it is not likely. The trend is it is going down precisely. The rise because of the base year that I've seen that we've seen. The main driver is oil. Even the price of oil has gone down from $87 per barrel to $75 per barrel. So anything that's possible, but it is improbable. It is not to be. It is not expected.
Got it. Hopefully not, no? Thanks, Dr. Dumlao. So for the next question, how will the current geopolitical concerns affect our economy?
It depends. We've seen uh, the effect, for example, of the Ukraine causing inflation. That's oil. The other one is uh, in Israel. That should not be a factor. If anything, it can be psychological. But if it's spread to Iran, and Iran is an oil producing economy, then that can affect us, especially inflation.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Dumlao again. So one of our audience asked, as an economist, what do you think contributes to the Philippine negative growth in agriculture, fishing, or forestry? In your opinion, what should be the priority of the government in the next 2 years to address this?
Again, it's as a business school. It's not agriculture, even rice. People speaking of self-sufficiency, but we have to face it that it is not our comparative advantage. We can only support our rice farmers, but then it's a question of not producing more, but it's a question of upping the quality. That's what they teach in business schools, to be competitiveness. And competitiveness is not about the quantity but rather the quality. For example, rather than the traditional uh, rice that's dependent on pesticides, we go organic, and that is more expensive in that sense, and that is where it creates value for our farmers. Again, we can speak of, instead of just harvesting, if you harvest the fish and then you sell it, that's it, that's the product. But if you harvest it and then you make it part of, then you have a post-harvest manufacturing. For example, my my kitchen table example is, if you harvest the fish, that's it. But if you harvest the fish and you debone it and then you package it, it becomes part of uh, uh, food manufacturing. So in that sense, the output in the harvesting in the agriculture did not increase, but the job improved, because the fisher is not longer just a fisher person per se, but an entrepreneur fishing, and then there's an added value in food manufacturing, and that's I think that should be the strategy. I think you're muted.
Oh, right. Thanks, Dr. Damlao. So for the next question, can we say that the Philippine economy is veering away from being a domestic consumption-driven economy?
Right now, this year, it seems to be an investment-driven economy, and that's good. Its consumption is still below its normal growth. Uh, that's probably that's half empty prognosis. But then again, if you look at it, it is investment that is leading the way. And if you have to choose, if we are to choose between the two, we rather be an investment-led economy rather than a consumer-led economy.
Got it. So investments is definitely good. For the next question, what is the forecast for the growth of tourism over the next 3 to 5 years?
Okay, so maybe I'll share. Uh, tourist. You said tourism, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I didn't show. Okay, it's not here. Uh, Tourism is projected to be for the arrival is projected to be around 6 million this year, 2024. Pre-pandemic, it was 8 million. So that means we still have plenty of room to recover to pre-pandemic levels. So that one, we have to work on that. So we can definitely handle 8 million. So it can grow by 33%. But so far we haven't gone there. The only country in ASEAN that it has gone back to pre-pandemic is Thailand. So it's across ASEAN that we're still trying to recover. We still have 33% more to go back to pre-pandemic.
Thanks, Dr. Dumlao. Looks like we still have more questions in the Q&A box. Yeah, for our viewers, if you have more questions, kindly put them in the Q&A box below. One of our audience is asking a follow-up on the previous question. Given the current trends in data, could dampen consumption offset gains in capital formation, or are investments expected to be enough to carry the GDP growth momentum over the following quarters?
So far, right now, it's enough for us to get to the equilibrium or steady state of 6.2, 6.3%. So so far it's carrying to that. it's more than enough so far. Well, it's just enough for us to get to that 6.2, 6.3% growth per year.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Dumlao. So we have time for a few more questions again. If our audience has more, kindly keep them coming. For the next question, one of our audience is concerned about the future energy inflation, considering that we would deplete the Malampayan natural gas reserve soon, which provides a substantial amount of power to the country, particularly in Luzon. This is further compounded by the ban on more coal power plants. How do you see this playing out in the next few years in terms of its effects on the country's economic growth?
It That's a tough question. That it will definitely be a constraint to economic growth. We do need power to sustain our economic growth. Uh, I'm I'm not sure how long do we have uh, for the Malampaya to I think less than 10 years, uh, but the hope is we are to find alternative energy before that runs out. Uh, and that is renewable. So that's it's now it's a race. It's a constraint, and now we are in the race to get to that. Uh, Perhaps a positive thing to think of is maybe we should invest. People here should be investing in renewables because that is probably where the future is, and that is where the profit is going to be in the future.
Got it. Thanks, Dr. Dumlao. For the next question regarding AI naman, how ready are Philippine companies in adopting AI? Is there a market for AI service providers in the Philippines?
So right now we're not the strategy right now. It's although it's not articulated, uh, it's really not AI but rather uh, RI. It's not artificial intelligence, but rather remote intelligence, and that is the uh, uh, business processing. So, uh, so an accounting uh, uh, procedure is not done in the States, but rather it's done in the Philippines. That's remote intelligence. Uh, uh, Finance, that another business process outsourcing, that's remote intelligence. That means what could be done by college graduates elsewhere abroad is being done here in this country. So that's remote intelligence. Uh, the war in Ukraine will be decided by remote intelligence in the form of drone. That is drones flying controlled by people somewhere in Arizona by the U.S. military. So that's remote intelligence. And the future is we will have uh, it's cheap. It's the You can have an AI uh, cleaning in the restaurant, or you can have a robot that is cleaning a restaurant somewhere in Finland that is run by someone in India. That's remote intelligence. And as soon as people figure out that it is cheaper to have remote intelligence rather than having an artificial intelligence, then it can be a game changer.
Got it. Thanks, Dr. Dumlao. So for the next question on the mining sector, will the domestic mining sector be able to contribute more in light of the problems of the Chinese economy?
Well, the policy right now is not the mining sector is relatively small compared to the economy, especially after uh, the uh, the the sustainability revolution that we're having right now. Uh, so it's probably not going to be a driver. Um, the reason why sometimes the growth spikes precisely because it is small. So a 1 plus 1 is 100% increase. That's why you see big numbers in growth in manufacturing. But a 100 plus 1 is just a 1% increase. And that's why you don't see much growth in other bigger sectors. and mining is a very small sector.
Thanks, Dr. Dumlao. So we have a few minutes left to answer some questions. Again, thank you to our audience for the timely and relevant questions. So for the next one, in terms of data, how would you quantify the effect of reliance on remittances?
Remittances is still record high. It's around 30. It's growing by 3% per year. We're getting record remittance every year still expected, but it is no longer the increase that it used to be about 10 years ago. 10 years ago, it was increasing by 50%, then 40%, 30%. Right now, it's still increasing, but it's not increasing as fast as it used to be. To the extent that the economy is growing an average of 6% per year and remittance is only growing by 3 or 2% per year, we would become less reliable in remittance in the further future, perhaps sometime 10, 15 years down the road. But still, we still rely on that. But 10 to 15 years down the road, the story could be different.
Got it. So the next question is projections on other industries. So one of our participants asked, do you have any projections for the growth in the following industries within the service sector, including retail, tourism, and BPO?
So time to share. Okay. So subsectors, so again, accommodation and food will grow the fastest. What's the concern? It's these numbers are our colleagues from First Metro will share these numbers. So these are the projected growths for the third quarter and fourth quarter. This projected growth for the year, and this is the long run growth. And the last column is how many years will each specific sector or industry will double. So is there any specific industry that you want that our participant wants to look at for me to
for them, they only ask for retail, tourism, and BPO.
that they're growing. They're the good ones basically. So this is retail. It's one of the biggest employers, and it's accommodation, the biggest producers. For example, retail produced 527,000 jobs. Accommodation and food services produced 397,000 jobs, and we expect that to continue for at least to be the main job producers for the next 6 quarters. Hope that answers.
Got it. Thanks, Dr. Dumlao. So for the next question, quite a big one. So is it possible for the country to grow sustainably and equitably, considering that we practically skipped our industrial development and went straight to being a service-oriented economy from an agriculture-focused economy?
Okay, what we have is I'm not sure what the premise is, but for what it is right now, if you look at the world economies, if you go at that our per capita income, our average income, and the 5 countries that have higher, so I think we're 105. So the 100, 101, 102, 103, 104, and then us 105. And then you go from 106, 107, 108, 109, 110 as per capita income increases, the share of agriculture decreases. And with that, we are right in the middle. So there is nothing anomalous with the share of agriculture in our industry. Of course, that's worldwide. There could be cultural problems. There could be climate differences. So what we can do is we look at ASEAN countries, our neighbor. And then if you go at Malaysia, Thailand, Philippines, Indonesia, and Vietnam, in that order, the highest per capita income is Malaysia, in that order also. And the one that has the lowest agricultural sector is Malaysia, followed by Thailand, then the Philippines. It's the same order. That means if you look at the global data, there's nothing anomalous with the share of agriculture in our economy.
Got it. Thanks, Dr. Dumlao. So we have time for about 2 more questions left. So the audience said some participants are following up on the industry outlook regarding transportation, storage, and construction.
Transportation, storage, and construction, it's one of the transport and storage is one of the fastest growing. It will double in 7 years. Double-digit growth this year. Construction is the main driver. Double-digit growth, 15% for next quarter, 13% the last quarter, and for the year, double-digit, also 13%. And on a longer term, it will double. Construction industry will double its size in 8 years.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Dumlao. So actually, for our last question, this is our last question for today. What do you believe is the key factor behind the Philippines' faster growth compared to its peers?
First of all, we're starting from below, and if you're starting from below, it's easier to grow faster. That's the natural advantage of having to grow faster. But by growing faster, it is by no means that we are already above and beyond our neighbors. We're still behind, and the fact that we're basically just catching up, and in our catching up, what it looks right now is that the main drivers are basically construction and retail and accommodation. So tourism also will have plenty to do with that.
All right. Thank you to our audience and Dr. Dumlao. I think that's all for our questions today. And that wraps up our quarterly economic briefing. Thank you everyone for the lively and fruitful discussion on the 2Q24 GDP results and economic performance. Thank you, Dr. Dumlao, for a thorough and well-crafted presentation and the lively exchange. Finally, to help us improve with the quality of our webinars, we kindly request 2 minutes of your time to fill out our feedback form. For this session with ACERD, you may scan the QR code flashed on your screens. Thank you so much for your participation. Again, the views and opinions expressed are those of ACERDs and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of First Metro Securities and the Metro Bank Group. This special briefing with ACERD was made possible by First Metro Securities. So this has been your host, Cal Garcia, and thank you so much and have a great week ahead, everyone.